Good morning, brother. I'm so glad we can be together today, and I invite you to open your Bible with me to the book of Ecclesiastes. In the Old Testament, Ecclesiastes chapter 11. Ecclesiastes chapter 11. I'm very excited to be with you and to be spending a few days in this gospel meeting. It is really a joy. I've been shown every kindness and hospitality by the Thacker family so far. I just slept so well, so comfortable, and what a joy it is to be with you and to worship. It's an exciting time to be a part of this congregation with a new building project underway, and it's just such a fine facility that God has blessed you all with, and you've been working together here for. And I think it's so exciting and a real honor to be able to do the first gospel meeting in it. The way that worked out was exciting to me, and I really do appreciate it. In this session, I'm wanting to talk to you about big faith in every chapter of life. Big faith in every chapter of life. I've been living in Florida now. I'm from Indiana originally, but I've been living in Florida now for about 8.5 years. And I grew up in Indiana, spent some time preaching in Tennessee. I know about life with four seasons, uh, but not so much in Florida. There's not the four seasons. There's rain and there's sunshine. And when I moved there, they said actually it's sunny every day. Now, sometimes we call it liquid sunshine, but it's sunny every day. But it's not so much the four seasons. But what I love about the four seasons is new beginnings. And here we are, kind of wrapping up winter in this area, and all of nature has been at rest and asleep and refreshing. And what's about to happen? Spring, spring in the mountains. Oh, that's a beautiful thing, isn't it? That's a beautiful thing. A new beginning. We see that in nature and seasons. The children see that in their years in school, right? And they get done with one grade and whatever they've accomplished there, I mean, that year's done. And maybe they had a teacher that was kind of hard on them and it was a tough year, but they made it through. And with the new year, they get a new teacher, new opportunities, and it's a new season. It's a new beginning. And I think that is a very fitting metaphor to go along with the book of Ecclesiastes of different seasons, the different chapters in our lives. And we know that it's true that we mark off new seasons and new chapters in our lives. In fact, when someone believes the gospel of Jesus Christ and they are baptized for the forgiveness of their sins, baptized into Jesus, this is a new beginning, isn't it? It's a new life, and you are a new creation. But as life goes on, you start out young and you finish school, you get a job, maybe strike out on your own, and that's a new season. That's a new season. You get married, start a family, a couple of little kids come along. That's a new season. Maybe as time goes on, you move to another house, or even move to another town, or even move to another state, and that's a whole new season. You start a business, change careers, new seasons. You graduate your kids. Next thing you know, they're married. Next thing you know, you're grandparents. New season. You retire from your work. You start caring for your own aged parents. Maybe you bury a couple of your friends. Those are new seasons. And one day, your kids are coming by and they're checking in on you. And that's a whole new season. And I want to tell you that through it all, in every season, in every stage, in every chapter of life, faith, faith is the way to make it the best that it can be. And I believe that any season in life with God is better than a season without Him. Absolutely, for sure. Faith, faith in the Lord. And Bible faith is not easy believism. Bible faith is not some Sunday only faith. Bible faith is not a mere mental assent. It's not a name it and claim it mantra. That is not Bible faith. But Bible faith is knowing God, trusting God, and obeying God regardless of your circumstance. That's what Bible faith is. Knowing God, trusting God, obeying God regardless of your circumstance. And what I believe about you, what I know about myself, is that all Christians are trying to grow in faith and be built up in faith. And as we build our faith, it's going to get big. At least it's going to get bigger than it is today. The more we know God, the more we trust God, the more we obey God, the bigger our faith gets. And in fact, I want that. Don't you want that? This time next year, don't you want your faith to be bigger than it is today? Of course you do. I know that we do. Big faith in every season, in every chapter of life. Big faith. So that if you are at a moment or in a day or in a season where you cannot quite see the outcome, you're not exactly sure how things are going to work out, you will choose in that moment to honor God and to obey God before anything else. That you will have strength and confidence in the Lord to go ahead and take that next step. Big faith, like Abraham, when he goes out to a land to follow the Lord, but he doesn't know where he's going. That's big faith. Or like Moses, who refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, chose rather to suffer with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. That's big faith. Big faith, like Mary, the Virgin Mary, who said to the angel Gabriel, "Behold, the maidservant of the Lord, let it be to me according to your word." Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that kind of faith? That's big faith. And in our text this morning from Ecclesiastes chapter 11, it is all about big faith in every chapter of life. Big faith in every chapter of life. And as we go along, you're going to say, we're going to read this text, talk about it. But you may not see the word faith itself be there. How do you get to a place where you say, this is all about faith? Well, as we come to Ecclesiastes chapter 12 and verse number 1, we're going to see three words in Ecclesiastes that mean faith, and they mean big faith. The first is remember. Remember God in Ecclesiastes chapter 12 and verse 1. Remember now your Creator in the days of your youth. Remember Him. In chapter 12 and verse 13, we're going to see the word fear God. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is man's all. And in chapter 12 and verse 13, keep God's commandments. Remember God, fear God, keep His commandments. Know God, trust God, obey the voice of God. And if that's not talking about faith and big faith, I can't think of a better explanation of it. I can't think of a better explanation of it. That is our definition for faith, big faith. Remember God, respect God, obey God. And Solomon shows us how, in the context of life, in the story of life, that we might have a big faith in every chapter of life. I appreciate Brother Philip and Brother Andrew working together to have the interactive outlines for all of these lessons. As we go along, we'll study the scriptures, and if you care to, you can fill in the blanks. My name is on there, my email's on there, and so if you'd like to ask any questions or talk about anything that I teach, that'd be fantastic. We can do it in the foyer. I'm not running off after services, but some people feel more comfortable to send an email, and so there's some good contact information for you. But I'm glad that we can be together and look to Ecclesiastes 11 now. Our first point this morning is talking about big faith in the sunny chapters and the dark chapters of life. I've got my Bible open to Ecclesiastes 11, and I want to read verses 7 and 8 with you now. Truly, the light is sweet, and it is pleasant for the eyes to behold the sun. But if a man lives many years and rejoices in them all, yet let him remember the days of darkness, for they will be many. All that is coming is vanity. If I could sum up these two verses in this way, I'd say that in your life, you're going to have some sunny times and you're going to have some dark times, but all of it is transitory. In the Bible scheme, none of those times last for very long. And I think that most of us appreciate, we understand that the Bible teaches the brevity of life. In such passages as James chapter 4 and verse 14, life is like a vapor, and it quickly goes away. I heard a comedian joking one time, and he said, people say life is short. No, it isn't. Life is long, especially when you make bad choices. And I thought he might have a point there, in that the experience we're having in life could be a very pleasant experience. And boy, doesn't time fly. But we have made some very poor choices, or we're having very negative experiences, and it seems like that clock hardly moves. And yet, when we come to this scripture, we are going to be encouraged by the truth. We all get 24 hours in a day. That's what we get. And if that time feels like it's passing slowly or passing quickly, depending on our circumstances, depending upon our attitude about our circumstances, but at all the same time, it is passing away. And how we view that time and use that time is very much dependent upon our faith. But we can see here from these verses that whether our life is feeling painful or pleasant at the moment, all the same, that day is gone. But that we ought to have an attitude and appreciation that each day of life is a gift and a blessing. In verse 7, it said, truly, the light is sweet. Sunrise means God has given you something great. When your eyes open up to the sun of a morning, remember God. Thank God, because He's already given you something precious. It is sweet. It is pleasant, Solomon says. And I do want to drive that home because he's going to use a word here in a moment, and that word is vanity. And that word vanity is all over Ecclesiastes. And whenever we read the word vanity, we may be tempted to get a little bit down, a little bit depressed. Maybe this isn't a good thing after all because it is vanity. But I want you to notice, beginning in verse 7, he says, truly, truly, the light is sweet. This day, this life is a gift, and that's a good thing. And we know that every good and perfect gift comes from God. And yet, even a good, long life is going to have some dark days. That's what we read in verse 8. If a man lives many years, let him remember there are days of darkness. And if I asked you if you had a choice, who wouldn't say, I'd like to have a good long life? I'd like to be full of days. It says that about some of the great people of God, and when they passed away in the Bible, that they were full of days. Wouldn't you like to be like that? And yet even people of big faith had some dark days. We think about Joseph in the book of Genesis. He went to prison for doing the right thing and fleeing temptation of Potiphar's wife. He acted right, he acted godly, and what he get? He got some dark days for his faith. Or we think about Moses, who was not allowed to enter the promised land, Canaan land, because he acted in pride and he struck a rock with a staff to produce a miracle of water when he was told to speak to the rock and God would bring the water forth. Well, those were dark days for him because he sinned. And there were difficult consequences in his life for that sin. That goal of leading the people over the river into the promised land, that was not realized for him because of a lack of faith in a season of life. We think about Job, who had dark days and was never told why. Was never told why. And then sometimes, whether we've been doing right things or making bad, evil choices, dark things happen. You have dark days. Time and chance overtake us all. Ecclesiastes 9, verse 11. But on the whole, I think we'd like to say, I'd like to have a good long life. I think I'd like to have a good long life. I had an opportunity in 2018 to make a trip to Indiana. It was a somewhat unexpected trip, and to speak at a funeral for my wife's grandmother, Miss Gladys. Miss Gladys lived to be 104 years old. And when I was telling people that I'm going to go there and speak at the funeral, and she's 104, almost invariably they would say, 104? That is a good long life. And I began to reflect upon it. It's true that that's a long life. Who would deny it? But why is it a good life? It's a good life if you choose to make it a good life. As I had opportunity to know her and even to prepare to speak a few words, there were a lot of things that happened in her life that you and I would probably not call good. And yet she chose to make it good. She had grown up in the farmlands of rural Illinois during the Great Depression. Very hard life growing up. She knew about the sacrifice of the World War II era, and there was not a lot of creature comforts that she knew in many of those years. In fact, on her 100th birthday, I asked her, I said, well, what's the two greatest things that you've seen in the course of your life? And she said, the two greatest things. Yeah, she goes, well, number one would have to be indoor plumbing, because she grew up without that. She said, number two, air conditioning. Definitely air conditioning in the house. I was really thinking she'd say something about a man on the moon. But for her, these were the greatest things she saw in her life. They didn't have a lot of those creature comforts. She married actually very late in life for her age, had a couple of daughters, and then she was widowed after only 15 years of marriage. So here she was, single mother. She was able to get on as a math teacher and do very well with that, but raising these two single daughters, it was just a lot of hardship in life. And there would be some people that would look at some of those hardship and tragedies of life and say, see right there, that's why I don't believe there's a God. How could a good God let hard things happen like that in somebody's life? But that wasn't Miss Gladys' attitude at all. Her testament was to a long life, not soured by hardships. But as Solomon says, we will see many days of darkness. It is big faith that keeps us through dark times to other sunny chapters. Big faith helps us understand and keep our hearts for God. And as the Bible uses the word heart, it doesn't mean the seat of our emotions or sentimentality. That's often what we mean when we hear the word heart today. But the Bible uses the word heart to communicate the mind, the seat of the will. And so the wise man Solomon wrote, keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it spring the issues of life. It is the understanding that your life is not everything that is happening to you. Rather, your life is what's flowing from your heart. That's what life's about. And Solomon does say that every day is vanity, which means it's quickly passing away. Time in life is not what you hold on to, but it is God. That's what you hold on to, because God is eternal. And that's big faith when we remember, when we respect, when we obey God today. It is big faith in God that carries us through to another sunrise. Big faith in God that carries us through to another sunrise. Thankful for the gift of today, rejoicing in it because it is temporary, and it is all the more precious because it is temporary. I had the opportunity a few years ago to go up to Alaska, to Soldotna, Alaska, and hold a gospel meeting. And if you ever have an opportunity to go to Alaska, you should go. You should see that. It is a different world up there. But as the brethren are explaining to me some of the features about Alaska, one of the things they were very proud of and telling me about was the World Ice Art Championships that happen every year. Artists come from all over the world to sculpt these huge blocks of ice, and it is all juried art. And there are awards, and it's a magnificent show. It's a really big deal. But I want you to reflect upon that for a moment. These artists sculpt in the medium of ice. Well, guess what happens to ice? Even in Alaska, guess what happens to ice? Yeah, it all melts away. It all goes away. It's transitory. It is vanity to sculpt in ice. Does that mean it's not good to sculpt in ice? No. No, it's all the more precious because it's temporary. It's all the more precious because it's transitory. And that's the way we understand life. It's all the more precious because it goes away. Big faith fashions our life into joy and fruitfulness in the brevity of a passing day. And as we move through Ecclesiastes 11 into chapter 12, this gets explored in two phases. Those early seasons, those early chapters, and those later seasons, those later chapters. So let's move on. Number 2 in the notes, big faith in the early chapters of life. Big faith in the early seasons of life. And I want to pick up reading with you in Ecclesiastes 11, verse number 9. Ecclesiastes 11, verse 9. Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes, but know that for all these, God will bring you into judgment. Therefore, remove sorrow from your heart and put away evil from your flesh, for childhood and youth are vanity. If you're younger this morning, we've got a nice mix of ages in the room. If you're younger this morning, what will the early chapters of your life be like? If you're older this morning, how did the early chapters of your life go? How did it go for you? Solomon shows us that big faith brings joyful and fruitful youth. Follow God in this advice. What advice? Well, first he says, enjoy it. Enjoy your youth in chapter 11, verse 9. Youth is not to be idolized, it is not to be coveted, but it is to be enjoyed. I mean, you live once, you're young once. That's the way God made it, so enjoy it. And I just want to say a word of encouragement to the young people in the room. You may have moments now when you're feeling like I'm not very optimistic about today. You know, you get up in the morning and getting ready to go to school, and you say, look in the mirror and you say, I don't like the way I look, and I'm awkward, and I don't get along with some of these people at school, and I don't wear the right clothes. I just don't fit in, and the young people that get so down upon themselves about those feelings, and those are real feelings, and I felt some of those things myself. I can remember being in middle school and talk about being a hot mess. Braces, glasses, acne, heavy. I was a walking punchline, I'm telling you, I was. I can look back and see that. And those things can weigh on you, and that can really trouble you. But here's my word of encouragement. A few years will go by, and you'll be going through a box of stuff from when you were a kid, and you'll get out a yearbook, and you will open that up, and you flip through, and you start to look at all the different classmates, and you find yourself there. And you will say, wow, I was so thin. And you say, wow, I had hair. And you say, wow, what was I so worried about? Things were good then. But I remember being so troubled all the time. I wish somebody had reminded me to enjoy this day and enjoy this youth, because it goes by so quick. And I just want to encourage you. I know it's difficult now, and there's difficult things and choices young people got to make. But Solomon says, but do remember to enjoy this day. Just go ahead and remember to enjoy this day. And begins to talk about how you enjoy this day. Because he tells you to explore. In chapter 11, verse 9, let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes. In these early chapters of life, you get to do things. You have opportunities, and you get to try things and try some new things. Try a new activity. Try a new sport. Try a new club. Go for education. It really does open doors for you. If you have an opportunity to travel a little bit, travel a little bit. See some places, because those experiences broaden your perspective of the world. Meet people and be open to meeting new people. One of the neat things about social media is you always have the ability to stay in touch with people from that old school or that youthful friend. You know, you could keep the same set of friends from when you're 5 years old and okay, but make sure along the way you meet some new people and you have some new friends. You never know where that might take you. I'm so thankful that I made a choice in high school to go and audition for a school musical, because I'm up there and I'm doing my thing trying to get a part in the play, but there was this young lady who I had not met before, and she sang, and she had a voice like an angel. And I mean, I just fell in love with her voice. And her name was Julie, and sure enough, I married that girl. I'm glad I was there that day. That worked out very well for me. A lot more beyond just doing a school play in high school. Trying something new, meeting some new people. You might be amazed at how the Lord will work in bringing people into life and where those things will go. Now, he says explore. He says travel these paths. But he says remember God. Always remember God. That's verse 9. And know that for all these, God will bring you into judgment. He says, go live, go be young, go explore, but live in light of God. Don't live despite God. Now it says, remember God. That doesn't mean tie a string around your finger. What was I supposed to remember? Oh, that's right. There's a God. That's what that means. No. What does it mean, remember God? It means know Him, trust Him, obey Him, regardless of your circumstances. Remember God, he says, and remember that God will judge. There is a warning. Don't think life is all about you and you're the judge. Actually, life is real short. God is eternal, and God is the judge. And so as a youth, spend some time in the Word. And when you do, you learn morality and that ethic revealed from God. And those things are true. And as a youth, spend some time in the Word so that you might learn genuine wisdom about life. It is revealed from God. And even as a youth, don't kid yourself to think that you've got things so figured out, or your friends have things so figured out, or some professor at the university has things so figured out to bring you to a place of saying, there's no God. That's backward stuff my parents believe. There's no God. That is foolishness. The beginning of knowledge, the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. And you will do well as a youth if you will remember God. Remember that God is the judge, but please remember God will provide. In chapter 11, in verse 10, therefore remove sorrow from your heart. How are you going to remove sorrow and vexation, worry, anxiety? I tell you, everything else in life changes, and it changes quickly. But if you're God's child, then what you have is the Lord, and He will never leave you, and He will never forsake you. And the more seasons you have, the more chapters you write in your life, the more of this truth you see. You just begin to see how God was with you. You just begin to see how God was opening some doors, closing some doors, how He was blessing you, and how He was using others to bless you, and how He was using you to bless others. In fact, when you're faithful to God, He will use you to impact others, and that is just the most exciting thing. Remember God, and remember that it is God who tells us, dictates good and evil. Chapter 11, verse 10, put away evil from your flesh. Our life is full of choices. Life is full of choices, and God bestows upon us the dignity of respecting our choices. And so He says, put evil away from you. Make a choice. The barb of temptation and sin is that everyone thinks they can get away with it. Everyone thinks they're just not the one. They're just not the one who'll get the bad dose of meth or heroin that kills them. That may happen to somebody else, but it won't happen to me. I'm not the one. They're never the one who thinks I'm too drunk to drive. Someone else might be too drunk to drive. Someone else might cross the median, but not me. Not me. I would never do that. They always think I'll never be the one to get a disease or get pregnant out of wedlock. That may happen to other people, but that would never happen to me. That's not possible for me. They never think that some angry ex would put pictures of them or videos of them in some various situation of embarrassment or undress or sin all over the internet. They made those videos because, well, this boyfriend loves me. This girlfriend loves me. They made those videos because, well, we were just having fun and we thought this was funny. No one was ever supposed to see all that. There are earthly consequences to forgetting God and choosing evil. And there are spiritual consequences to forgetting God and choosing evil. What the Bible tells us to is to remember God. Big faith that remembers God. And big faith also understands that when I make mistakes, when I act foolishly, when I have sinned against God, actually God has the answer for that too. We need to remember God and turn back to God. because God has made the way of repentance and forgiveness in Christ and a fresh start. And God can take that old and that bad and He can make it new and He can make it fresh in the gospel of Jesus Christ. God has the answer for that too. And Big Faith understands that there's a group of people. It's some people right here in this room, a church. There's a church family of God, a church of Christ, which embodies the love of Christ, and we can work through our troubles together by God's grace. And we can help one another to put away evil. Can we start? Can we see how the early chapters of life, that start, that beginning, requires a big faith? In so many words, let us remember God, fear God, obey God when we are young. Start as young as we can and building up a big faith. Start as young as you can in exercising faith. Why? Because the early chapters of life are transitory. How does the chapter end? For childhood and youth are vanity. Vanity, futile, empty, quickly gone, transitory. Oh, our youth, the prime of life, these are wonderful seasons. But they are written, they are done, and they go quickly. So this day really counts. What are we going to do with today? Because life moves on swiftly to another season, to another chapter. And that's Ecclesiastes chapter 12. Big faith in the later chapters of life. Number 3 in your notes, big faith in the later chapters of life. Ecclesiastes 12, and my Bible is open to verse 1, where we read, "Remember now your Creator in the days of your youth, before the difficult days come and the years draw near when you say, I have no pleasure in them. While the sun and the light, the moon and the stars are not darkened, and the clouds do not return after the rain. And the day when the keepers of the house tremble, and the strong men bow down, when the grinders cease because they are few, and those that look through the windows grow dim. When the doors are shut in the streets, the sound of grinding is low. When the one rises up at the sound of a bird, and all the daughters of music are brought low. And they are afraid of height, and of terrors in the way. When the almond tree blossoms, the grasshopper is a burden, and desire fails. For man goes to his eternal home, and the mourners go about in the streets." What we have in these first 5 verses of Ecclesiastes 12 is a very poetic picture of aging, a very poetic picture of advanced aging. You know, this business about almond tree blossoms, my understanding is they blossom white. And if you're blessed enough to keep your hair when you're older, it'll be white, you know. This idea about, having a situation where you hear a little bird at night and you wake up and you can't go back to sleep. But then there's other things you can't hear at all. And the grinders are low. You're not able to chew your food the way you used to be able to. And being afraid of terrors, you might fall, and that's going to be a bad thing if you fall. And there's a lot of imagery here. Well, when does this begin? Moses said that life could be 70 or 80 years in Psalm 90, verses 9 through 10. And I always chuckle at that. Here's the guy who led the Israelites through the Red Sea when he was 80, and he lived to be 120. But he tells us to have that kind of expectation of aging. But he was probably a little bit outside the norms in his health. There was a elder in the church at Tennessee where I preached for a number of years. His name was Myron Thomas, and he's gone on to his reward now. But as he became older and he was shut in, I would go and visit with him, and I loved to talk to Brother Thomas. He was so wise. And I'd go and I'd sit down with him, and he'd look at me and he said, "Oh, Andrew, I remember when I was a young man like you." He said, "I'd look at a fella and I'd think 60 years old, that is old. Do you know what happened when I got to be 60 years old?" I said, "What's that, Brother Thomas?" He said, I said, "60's not old, but 70. 70 is old. But do you know what happened when I got to be 70 years old?" I said, what's that, Brother Thomas? He goes, 70's not old, but now 80's old. Do you know what happened when I got to be 80 years old? I said, what's that, Brother Thomas? He goes, I got to be 80 years old, and I'm going to tell you, 80 is old. Now, Brother Thomas said that. I didn't say that. That's what Brother Thomas said. I will tell you, though, that by the time Brother Thomas was 80, and in those early 80s, those were hard years for him. His wife had gotten Alzheimer's. She didn't know who he was. He was caring for her to such a degree that he actually broke his back in the process, was laid up with a broken back in a rehab facility. I mean, he was an incredible example of love and faithfulness and devotion and godliness. Just tremendous respect for him. But the last few years of his life were very difficult years. And there was another one where I looked at and was amazed at the strength of his faith. In those years, we need big faith to remember God and respect God and obey God, because the day comes when you are limited by age. There's health limits, there's financial limits, there's time limits, and none of us get a day back. And you need big faith when the sun rises and you don't feel good. And you need faith when you or your spouse is dealing with some various ongoing infirmity. Those that are on the onset with age. And you've got to deal with things now that a good night's rest doesn't cure. You need faith when you begin attending the funerals for your friends and your peer set. You need faith when you attend the funeral of your spouse. You need faith when it's often quiet and lonely. You need faith when you realize that all things being equal, you are much closer to meeting God face to face now than you've ever known. And faith teaches us that is a plenty exciting moment and a tender moment for Christians, not a dreadful moment, because precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints. But these realities call for big faith. That faith that we've been building for years in the service of the Lord. And the chapter goes on to give then poetic imagery of death. Verse 6, Ecclesiastes 12, verse 6. Remember your Creator before the silver cord is loosed, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher shattered at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the well. Then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. And how is death pictured here in this poetry? Suddenness. The suddenness of a chain breaking. It causes the lamp to fall. I don't know what you picture in your mind when you think of a lamp, but for these old Israelite lamps, it'd look a whole lot like what we would call a bowl full of oil in it, and that oil would be set on fire. When that thing shatters, the oil goes everywhere, the light goes out, and there's no repairing them. Suddenness. The suddenness of the wheel snapping at the well, the water pitcher, that's falling, that's crashing down. You're not putting that one back together. It's done. There's no repairing it. And in that picture of that sudden crushing, it is this sudden departure, and dust goes to the earth, but there's a spirit, and a spirit goes to God. And what's he say? He says in verse 8, all is vanity. That is, all is transitory. It's all futile because it doesn't last. None of these things last for very long at all, except God. Except that God endures. And so what we need is big faith in God in every chapter of life. In Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verses 13 and 14, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is man's all. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil. We need faith. We need big faith. We do not need faith for faith's sake. I'm not talking about faith in faith. I'm certainly not teaching to have faith in yourself. Solomon's treatise is not a big self-esteem booster, but Solomon's treatise is a big faith booster. Faith, big faith in God. In God. Remember God in every season, every chapter of life. Fear God in every season, every chapter of life, and obey God in every season, in every chapter of life. And that builds big faith in every chapter of life. And my heart, my desire is that this gospel meeting will be all about that. Building up faith and building up big faith. I'm so excited about the theme that you all have this year, about faith in action, building up that kingdom together. And I wanted to be touching on that theme with all of these, complementing that theme and all of these lessons in our time together this week. And so I just want to tell you right up front, we're about faith, big faith, and being in God's Word together to build one another up and encourage one another in that way. God bless you all for your good attention this morning. Amen.